Before anything existed that you could name or touch or see, there was only absence, not darkness as you understand it now, for darkness requires the possibility of light to give it meaning. This was something deeper, something more complete. It was the silence before the first sound, the stillness before the first motion, the emptiness that waited without knowing what it waited for, and hovering over this formless expanse, moving across the face of waters that had no shore and no bottom, was a presence, a breath, a spirit trembling with intention not yet spoken. Then came the word, not a whisper, not a shout, but something between and beyond both. A declaration that shattered the eternal quiet and set everything into motion. Let there be light. And from nothing, from the pure void that had stretched backward into forever, brilliance erupted. It spilled outward in every direction, illuminating what had never been seen, because there had been nothing to see and no eyes to witness it. The light was good. It was separated from the darkness, pulled apart like two dancers who had been holding each other too closely, and given its own domain. The light was called day, and the darkness was called night, and together they marked the first evening and the first morning. The first day had ended, and time itself had begun its endless march forward. On the second day, attention turned to the waters. They stretched without boundary, mingling with the mists above in an endless gray confusion. A firmament was called into being, a vast dome of separation, an expanse that would hold back the waters above from the waters below. This great barrier arched overhead like the inside of an enormous shell, creating space where there had been none. The firmament was called heaven, though it was not yet the heaven of clouds and birds and painted sunsets. It was structure imposing itself upon chaos, order emerging from the primordial soup of existence. Evening fell across this new division, and morning rose to greet the second day. The waters below the firmament still covered everything, a single endless sea, with nothing to interrupt its monotony. On the third day, a command gathered these waters together, pulling them into designated places. And as they receded and collected, something new emerged from beneath their surface. Dry ground appeared, lifting itself above the waves, and it was called earth. The gathered waters were called seas, and they lapped against the shores of this newborn land with a rhythm that would continue for all ages to come. But the earth was barren, brown, and gray, and lifeless. Another word was spoken, and the ground responded with an explosion of green. Grass pushed up through the soil, tender shoots reaching toward the light they had never seen but somehow knew to seek. Plants of every variety burst forth from the earth. Some bore seeds openly, scattering them to the wind to find their own plots of ground. Others wrapped their seeds in fruit, sweet offerings that would one day nourish creatures not yet imagined. Trees stretched their branches toward heaven, their roots digging deep into the soil, their leaves unfurling like countless small hands catching the light. Orchards appeared without anyone to tend them. Forests rose without anyone to walk beneath their canopy. Meadows bloomed with flowers that no eye had ever seen. The world was dressing itself in beauty, preparing for guests who had not yet been invited. The evening came softly over this garden world, and the morning of the third day dawned bright with possibility. The fourth day brought adornment to the heavens. The firmament had been empty, a vast blue dome with nothing to mark the passage of time across its surface. Now it was filled with lights, great and small, each set in its appointed place. Its greater light ruled the day, a blazing sphere that rose in the east and made its slow journey toward the western horizon, warming the earth and calling the plants to grow ever upward. The lesser light ruled the night, a gentle silver glow that waxed and waned in its endless cycle, marking months and seasons for those who would one day learn to read its phases. And the stars, countless points of brilliance, scattered across the darkness like seeds thrown by a generous hand. They formed patterns that would one day be given names and stories, guides for travelers, and inspiration for dreamers. The heavens were no longer empty, but filled with light and motion. A great clock measuring out days and years, seasons and ages. The celestial bodies moved in their orbits with perfect precision, never colliding, never straying from their appointed paths. Evening painted the sky in colors the earth had never seen, and morning brought the great light climbing once again above the edge of the world. The fifth day turned attention to the waters and the skies, those vast, empty spaces that waited to be filled with movement and sound. Seas teemed suddenly with life. Creatures of every shape and size swam through the depths, from the smallest fish, no bigger than a fingernail, to great whales that moved through the water like living mountains. They had scales that caught the light and turned it into rainbows, fins that propelled them through currents, gills that drew life from the water itself. Schools of silver fish moved as one mind, turning and darting in patterns of collective beauty. Above, the sky filled with wings. Birds burst into existence, their songs filling the air with music the world had never heard. Some were small enough to hover before a flower, their wings beating so fast they became invisible blurs. Others were great soaring creatures that rode the winds without effort, their shadows passing over the land below like dark clouds. They built nests in trees and on cliff faces, and they were commanded to be fruitful, to multiply, to fill the waters and the skies with their kind. The world was no longer quiet. It hummed and splashed and sang with 10,000 voices. As evening settled over this chorus, and morning brought new songs. The sixth day began with the earth itself bringing forth life. From the ground came creatures of every kind, as though the soil had been pregnant with possibility and was now giving birth. Cattle emerged, placid and gentle, their eyes deep pools of peaceful existence. Wild beasts prowled the forests and plains, their muscles rippling beneath their fur, their senses sharp and alive. Small creatures scurried through the underbrush, burrowing into the earth that had borne them, climbing trees, swimming through streams. Everything that walked or crawled or slithered upon the ground came forth in this great procession of life. The world was full now, every corner occupied, every niche filled with some creature perfectly suited to its place. The plants fed the animals that fed other animals in chains of sustenance that balanced perfectly. The whole earth was a garden tended by no one, a paradise functioning in complete harmony. But it was not yet complete. Then came the moment toward which everything had been building. A consultation, a deliberation, a sacred pause before the final act of creation. Let us make humanity in our image, according to our likeness. Not from a word alone this time, but from the dust of the ground itself. The same earth that had brought forth plants and animals now provided the raw material for something new, something different, something that would bear the very image of its creator. Dust was gathered and shaped. It was molded like clay in the hands of a potter, given form and structure, limbs and features. A face emerged from the shapeless matter. A body took form, fingers and toes, a chest waiting for breath. And then, intimately, tenderly, breath was given. Not a command from a distance, but a gift shared closely, mouth to mouth, the breath of life passing from creator to creation. The dust became flesh, the flesh became living, and a man opened his eyes for the first time. He was called Adam, a name that echoed the earth from which he had been taken. He stood upright, unlike any other creature, his eyes able to look toward the heavens from which his spirit had come. He was given dominion over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, over every living thing that moved upon the earth. He was the caretaker, the steward, the one who would name and tend and rule this garden world. In him, heaven and earth met, dust animated by divine breath, mortality touched by eternity. A garden was planted for him in the east, in a place called Eden. It was paradise distilled into a single location, the most beautiful corner of a beautiful world. Rivers flowed through it, for great streams that watered the ground and made everything grow in abundance. Trees filled this garden, every variety pleasing to the eye and good for food. Their branches heavy with fruit, their shade cool and inviting. In the center of this garden stood 2 trees unlike any others. The first was the tree of life, its fruit offering something the man could not yet understand, something beyond the ordinary sustenance the other trees provided. The second was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, its branches reaching toward heaven, its roots digging deep into mysteries better left buried. The man was given freedom to eat from any tree in the garden. Every fruit was his to enjoy. Every delight was offered freely. But the fruit of that second tree was forbidden. To eat from it would be to die. The man was placed in this garden to work it and keep it. He was not meant for idleness, but for purpose, not for mere existence, but for cultivation and care. He walked among the trees and named the animals as they were brought before him, each one receiving its identity from his lips. Lion and lamb, eagle and serpent, everything that breathed received its name from this newly created being who bore the image of his maker. But as the animals passed before him, 2 by 2, male and female, something became clear. Among all these creatures, none was a suitable companion for the man. The lion had his lioness, the eagle had his mate, but Adam stood alone. His dominion set him apart. His image-bearing nature separated him from the beasts he named. He was not meant for solitude. It's not good for him to be alone. A deep sleep fell upon him, heavier than any rest he had known, a sleep so profound that what happened next was hidden from his awareness. Something was taken from his side, a rib drawn from his sleeping body, and from this bone, this piece of Adam himself, another being was fashioned. Not from the dust this time, but from the man, bone of his bone and flesh of his flesh. When he awoke, she was there. His eyes opened to see someone like himself, yet wonderfully different, someone who matched him in ways no animal ever could. His breath caught in his chest, and he spoke the first recorded words of any human being. This one, at last, is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. She was called woman, for she was taken out of man, and in her creation, the pattern was set for all generations to come. A man would leave his father and mother, would cleave to his wife, and the 2 would become one flesh. They stood together in the garden, the man and the woman, naked and unashamed. They had nothing to hide from each other and nothing to fear. The evening of that 6th day settled over them like a blessing, and morning would bring the 7th day. The work of creation was complete. Heaven and earth were finished, the host of them established in their places. On the 7th day, there was rest, a sacred pause, a blessing on the completion of all that had been made. The world existed, beautiful and whole, waiting for the story that was about to unfold within it. Among all the creatures that moved through the garden, one possessed a cunning that set it apart from the rest. The serpent was more crafty than any beast of the field, its movements smooth and silent, its eyes holding a strange intelligence that seemed to see beyond the surface of things. It watched the woman from the shadows of the trees, observed her walking among the flowers, noted how her gaze sometimes drifted toward the center of the garden where the 2 forbidden trees stood. And one day, when she wandered near that sacred center, the serpent spoke. Its voice was soft, insinuating, wrapped in false innocence. Did the Creator really say that you shall not eat from any tree in the garden? The question was a distortion, a twisting of the truth designed to plant seeds of doubt. The woman corrected the serpent gently. They could eat from the trees of the garden freely, all of them. Every fruit was theirs to enjoy. Only the tree in the center was forbidden. They were not to eat from it or even touch it, lest they die. The serpent's response came quickly, smoothly, like poison dressed in honey. You will not surely die. The denial was bold, a direct contradiction of what had been commanded. But the serpent did not stop there. It offered an explanation, a reason behind the prohibition that appealed to something deep within the woman. The Creator knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be opened. You'll be like divine beings, knowing good and evil. The woman looked at the tree with new eyes. She saw that it was good for food, that its fruit would be pleasant to taste. She saw that it was beautiful, a delight to behold, its branches graceful, its leaves shimmering in the dappled light. And she saw that it was desirable for gaining wisdom, for understanding things that had been hidden from her. Aha! The serpent's words echoed in her mind, promising elevation, promising knowledge, promising a transformation that would lift her beyond her current state. Her hand reached out, her fingers closed around the fruit. She pulled it from the branch and brought it to her lips. The taste was unlike anything she had known, sweet and complex, flooding her senses with sensations she could not name. She did not fall dead upon the ground. The serpent had been right about that, at least. She turned to her husband, who was there with her, and she offered the fruit to him. Kai, he took it from her hand. He bit into its flesh. He swallowed. In that moment, everything changed. Their eyes were opened, just as the serpent had promised, but what they saw was not what they had expected. They saw themselves, truly saw themselves, and for the first time they felt exposed. The nakedness that had been natural and innocent now felt shameful, vulnerable, wrong. They looked at each other and looked away, suddenly aware of something they had never noticed before. They needed to cover themselves, to hide what had always been openly displayed. Fig leaves were gathered hastily, sewn together with trembling fingers, fashioned into crude garments that covered their bodies. But even as they wrapped themselves in these makeshift clothes, they knew the leaves could not cover what had truly been exposed. Something inside them had shifted. Some innocence had been lost that no amount of foliage could restore. They heard a sound that had always brought joy before, the sound of their Creator walking in the garden in the cool of the day. But now that sound filled them with terror. They hid themselves among the trees, pressing their bodies against the bark, holding their breath, hoping somehow to escape notice. But a voice called out, piercing through the leaves and shadows. "Where are you?" It was not a question born of ignorance, for the one who asked already knew the answer. It was an invitation to confession, a chance to step forward and acknowledge what had been done. The man emerged from his hiding place, his voice small and afraid. He had heard the sound of walking in the garden, and he had been afraid because he was naked, so he had hidden himself. The question came back, gentle but probing. "Who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree that was forbidden?" Blame flowed quickly from the man's lips. The woman who had been given to him, she had offered him the fruit, and he had eaten. He pointed his finger at her, and in doing so, pointed it also at the one who had made her and given her to him. The woman, when questioned, passed the blame further down the chain. The serpent had deceived her, had tricked her with his clever words, and she had eaten. Everyone had an excuse. No one would simply say, "I did this thing." The serpent received its judgment. First, would be cursed above all livestock, above every beast of the field. Upon its belly it would crawl, and dust it would eat all the days of its life. Its enmity would exist forever between the serpent and the woman, between its offspring and hers. Her seed would strike at the serpent's head, and the serpent would strike at his heel. In this curse lay buried a promise, a hint of future redemption, but its full meaning would not be understood for generations upon generations. The woman's judgment followed. Pain would multiply in her childbearing. Agony would accompany the bringing forth of new life. Her desire would be for her husband, and he would rule over her. The partnership of equals in the garden would be twisted into something else, something marked by struggle and imbalance. What had been harmony would become hierarchy. The man heard his judgment last, 'cause he had listened to his wife's voice and eaten from the forbidden tree. The ground itself was cursed on his account. The earth that had brought forth abundance so freely would now resist his efforts. Thorns and thistles would spring up where he tried to plant crops. By the sweat of his brow he would eat bread, struggling against the soil until the day he returned to it. dust he was, and to dust he would return. The breath that had animated him would one day depart, and his body would dissolve back into the earth from which it had been formed. The Creator made garments of animal skin to clothe them, replacing their inadequate fig leaves with something more substantial. In this act of provision, blood was shed for the first time, life taken to cover the shame of those who had brought death into the world. They were clothed, but they could not stay. The way to the tree of life had to be guarded, for if they ate from it now, in their fallen state, they would live forever in their brokenness. They were sent out from Eden, expelled from the garden that had been their home. Behind them, at the eastern gate, cherubim took their positions, mighty beings with a flaming sword that turned in every direction. The way back was sealed. The garden would continue to exist, somewhere beyond their reach, a memory of paradise lost that would haunt humanity through all its generations. They walked eastward, away from everything they had known, into a world that would now resist them at every turn. The woman conceived and bore a son. She named him Cain, saying that she had produced a man with the help of the Creator. Perhaps she thought this child was the promised one, the seed who would strike the serpent's head. Later, she bore another son, and she called him Abel. The brothers grew, each finding his place in the world outside the garden. Abel became a keeper of sheep, tending flocks that wandered the hills. Cain worked the ground, fighting against the thorns and thistles to bring forth crops from the cursed earth. In the course of time, both brothers brought offerings, presented some of the fruits of the ground, the produce of his difficult labor. Abel brought the firstborn of his flock, the fatty portions, the best of what he had. The offering of Abel was regarded with favor, but the offering of Cain was not. Why one was accepted and the other rejected has been debated through all the ages since. Perhaps it was the quality of what was given, the firstborn versus merely some. Perhaps it was the heart behind the offering, the attitude of the giver, rather than the gift itself. Cain's face fell, Cain's face within him like a dark tide, and his countenance grew hard. A warning came to him, a voice explaining that if he did well, would he not be accepted? But if he did not do well, sin was crouching at his door like a predator waiting to spring. Its desire was for him to consume him, to master him, but he could rule over it if he chose. He could resist the darkness that was building inside him. He did not resist. He spoke to his brother Abel, and when they were in the field together, away from any witness, Cain rose up against him. His hands, the hands that worked the soil and planted seeds, became instruments of destruction. His brother's blood poured out onto the ground, the first human death in a world that had been made for life. Abel lay still upon the earth, and Cain stood over him, his chest heaving, his hands stained red. A voice came again, asking another question that needed no answer. Where is your brother Abel? And Cain, following in the footsteps of his parents, tried to deflect. I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper? But the blood was crying out from the ground, a voice that could not be silenced, demanding justice for what had been done. The earth that had received Abel's blood would no longer yield its strength for Cain. He would be a fugitive and a wanderer, rootless and restless, driven across the face of the land. Cain cried out that his punishment was more than he could bear. Everyone who found him would try to kill him, and he would have no home, no rest, no safety. A mark was placed upon him, a sign that would protect him from vengeance, for even in judgment there was mercy. Anyone who killed Cain would suffer sevenfold retribution. He went out from the presence of his Maker and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden, wandering even further from the garden his parents had lost. Cain built a city there, the first city, named after his son Enoch. His descendants multiplied and spread. They became craftsmen and musicians, workers of bronze and iron, shapers of the world around them. But violence followed in their wake. Lamech, several generations down, boasted of killing a man for wounding him, a young man for striking him. Cain was avenged sevenfold. Lamech would be avenged 77-fold. The darkness that had crouched at Cain's door had found its way inside and was spreading through his line. But Adam and Eve had not stopped bearing children. Another son was given to them, and Eve named him Seth, saying that the Creator had appointed another offspring in place of Abel, whom Cain had killed. Seth was a new beginning, a fresh branch on the family tree, a line through which hope would be carried forward. Seth had a son named Enosh, and in those days, people began to call upon the name of the one who had made them. Worship arose from the descendants of Seth, a reaching back toward what had been lost, a longing for the presence that had walked in the garden in the cool of the day. The two lines of humanity stretched forward into time. The line of Cain built cities and forged tools and made music, but carried within it a legacy of violence and pride. The line of Seth called upon sacred names and kept alive the memory of what humanity had been meant to be. Both lines would continue, intertwining and separating, their descendants filling the earth with all the complexity and contradiction that would mark human history. From that day forward, the story had only just begun. The generations rolled forward like waves upon an endless shore, each one rising and falling, leaving its mark upon the sand of time before receding into memory. Adam lived for 930 years, watching his descendants multiply across the land, seeing cities rise and fields spread, carrying within him always the ache of paradise lost. He had known the garden, had walked in the presence of his Maker, had felt the breath of life enter his nostrils directly from the source of all being. And then he had known exile, had felt the ground resist his labor, had buried one son and banished another. When death finally came for him, it was both an ending and a release, the return to dust that had been promised so long ago. Seth lived 912 years and fathered Enosh, and Enosh lived 905 years and fathered Kenan. The names accumulated like stones in a memorial, each one representing a life stretched across centuries that modern minds can scarcely comprehend. Kenan fathered Mahalo, and Mahalo fathered Jared, and each of them saw hundreds of years pass beneath their feet. They watched forests grow from saplings to ancient groves, and saw rivers change their courses over generations. They witnessed the slow transformation of the world as humanity spread and multiplied. Jared lived 962 years, one of the longest lives recorded in those ancient days, and he fathered a son named Enoch. This name had appeared before, given to the son of Cain, the one for whom the first city was built. But this Enoch, son of Jared, descendant of Seth, would be remembered for something far more remarkable than any city. He walked with the divine in a way that set him apart from all who came before or after in those early generations. Enoch lived 65 years and fathered Methuselah, and then something extraordinary happened. For 300 years after his son was born, Enoch walked in intimate communion with his Creator. The text does not say he merely lived, as it says of the others. It says he walked, suggesting movement, companionship, a journey taken together. While others lived their centuries and died, Enoch cultivated a relationship so close that the boundary between earth and heaven grew thin around him. When Enoch had lived 365 years, a number matching the days of the solar year, he was no more. But the reason given was unlike any other death recorded in that long genealogy. It was no more because the divine took him. He did not die in the usual sense, did not return to the dust as his ancestors had. He was simply taken, translated from one form of existence to another, his walk with the eternal continuing beyond the veil that separates the seen from the unseen. In all those early chapters of human history, only Enoch escaped the universal sentence of death, a sign that the bond between Creator and creation could still bridge the gap that sin had opened. Methuselah, son of the one who was taken, lived longer than any other human being whose years are recorded. 969 years he walked the earth, and nearly a millennium of life, stretching from the early days of humanity almost to the great catastrophe that would reshape the world. His name, some say, carried a prophecy within it, meaning something like, when he dies, it shall come. And indeed, the year of his death would mark the year of the flood. Here was a living countdown, a patient warning, walking among humanity for nearly 1,000 years. Methuselah fathered Lamech, not the boastful Lamech of Cain's line, but a different man who would become the father, of the one through whom humanity would survive its darkest hour. This Lamech lived 777 years and spoke words of hope over his newborn son. He named the child Noah, saying this one would bring comfort and relief from the painful toil of working ground that had been cursed. The name meant rest, and rest would indeed come through Noah, though not in the way his father might have imagined. Noah grew to manhood in a world that was spiraling toward destruction. Something had gone terribly wrong with humanity. Something beyond the ordinary sins and struggles that had marked life since the expulsion from Eden. The sons of heaven looked upon the daughters of humanity and saw that they were beautiful. They took wives for themselves, any they chose, crossing a boundary that should not have been crossed. The exact nature of these beings has been debated endlessly. Were they fallen angels, celestial creatures who abandoned their proper domain? Were they the descendants of Seth, the godly line intermarrying with the corrupt line of Cain? The text leaves room for mystery, but the consequences were clear. Giants walked the earth in those days, the Nephilim, beings of great size and strength who became the mighty ones of old, the men of renown whose legends would echo through the ages. But their fame was not righteous fame. The earth was filling with violence and corruption, every institution and relationship twisted from its original design. The wickedness of humanity had become great, and every inclination of the thoughts of their hearts was only evil all the time. Not occasionally evil, not partially corrupted, but thoroughly and continuously wicked. The divine heart was grieved. This is a remarkable statement, suggesting that the Creator, who had called everything good, now felt pain at what his creation had become. It grieved him to his heart that he had made humanity upon the earth. The great experiment of free will had produced monsters, both literal and moral. The violence had become so pervasive that the very ground cried out for cleansing. A decision was reached, terrible in its scope, but necessary for any hope of redemption to survive. Humanity would be blotted out from the face of the earth, along with the animals and the creeping things and the birds of the heavens. But Noah found favor. In the midst of universal corruption, one man stood apart. He was righteous in his generation, blameless among his contemporaries, and like his ancestor Enoch, he walked with the divine. His 3 sons were named Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And through these 4 men and their wives, the human story would continue. Everything else would be washed away, but this small remnant would carry the seed of humanity into a new world. Noah received instructions unlike any that had been given before. He was to build an ark, a massive vessel of gopher wood, whatever that ancient timber may have been. The dimensions were precise and enormous. 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, 30 cubits high. If a cubit measured roughly 18 inches, this boat was stretched 450 feet in length, 75 feet across, and 45 feet from keel to roof. It would have 3 decks, a door in its side, and a window near the top. It would be covered inside and out with pitch to make it waterproof. The purpose of this ark was preservation. A flood was coming, waters that would destroy all flesh under heaven, every living thing that had the breath of life. But with Noah, a covenant would be established, the first use of that sacred word in Scripture. Noah would enter the ark with his sons and his wife and the wives of his sons, and he would bring with him representatives of every living thing, 2 of every kind, male and female, to keep them alive through the destruction that was coming. The task was staggering in its scope, gathering materials, constructing a vessel larger than anything that had ever been built, preparing provisions for an unknown duration, Noah obeyed. The text states it simply, without elaboration on the difficulties or doubts he must have faced, according to all that he was commanded. So he did. Year after year, the ark took shape, while the world around it continued in its violence and corruption, unaware or uncaring of the judgment that was being prepared. Animals began to arrive as the construction neared completion. 2 of every kind came to Noah, male and female, to be kept alive aboard the vessel. Birds and beasts and creeping things, creatures from every corner of the earth, drawn by an instinct beyond their understanding to the wooden refuge that would carry them through the end of the world. Of the clean animals, those suitable for sacrifice and food, 7 pairs were taken, ensuring that worship could continue and that these species would have greater numbers to repopulate the cleansed earth. Noah was 600 years old when the waters came, and his household entered the ark, and the animals followed, 2 by 2, as they had been commanded. The door was shut behind them, sealed by a hand greater than Noah's own. They waited in the darkness of that wooden womb, surrounded by the sounds of countless creatures, the smell of hay and animal, the creaking of timber newly built. Then the heavens opened. The fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of heaven were thrown wide. Water came from below and above, simultaneously, as if the separation made on the second day of creation was being undone. The firmament that had held back the waters above now let them pour through. The seas that had been gathered into their places now surged beyond their boundaries. Rain fell in sheets so thick that the world disappeared behind curtains of water. The flood rose steadily, lifting the ark from the ground where it had rested. What had been a construction project on dry land became a ship upon an endless sea. The waters prevailed and increased greatly upon the earth, and the ark floated on the surface of the deep. Higher and higher the waters climbed, covering the hills, then the mountains, till nothing remained above the surface but the gray expanse of waves beneath the gray curtain of rain. 15 cubits above the highest peaks the waters prevailed, ensuring that nothing could survive by clinging to any summit. Everything died. All flesh that moved upon the earth perished, birds and livestock, wild beasts and swarming creatures, and every human being, all in whose nostrils was the breath of life. All who had walked upon dry land were blotted out. Cities were swallowed. Fields were buried. The violence that had filled the earth was silenced at last beneath fathoms of water. Only Noah remained, and those who were with him in the ark, floating on the surface of a world made new by destruction. The rain continued for 40 days and 40 nights, but the ark held firm. Its timbers had been well joined, its seams well sealed. Inside, in the darkness, Noah and his family tended the animals, fed the creatures that would repopulate the earth, and waited. They could not see what was happening outside. They could only hear the rain hammering against the roof and feel the gentle rocking of the ark upon waters that had no shore. The old world was gone. What would emerge when the waters receded remained to be seen. The waters prevailed upon the earth for 150 days. The ark drifted without direction, carried by currents that had no name across an ocean that had no boundary. Tide. The 8 survivors maintained their routines, feeding the animals, clearing waste, keeping the fragile ecosystem of the vessel functioning day after day. Time lost its meaning when there was no sun to mark the hours, no horizon to measure distance, nothing but the endless gray of water meeting sky in every direction. Noah must have wondered if the world would ever return. He had been given no timetable, no promise of when the waters would recede. He had only the command to build and enter, and then the door had closed behind him. Faith in those circumstances was not a warm feeling, but a daily choice, a decision to continue caring for the animals, to continue believing that the preservation had a purpose, even when the evidence suggested that nothing remained to return to. But the divine had not forgotten those who floated upon the deep. A wind was sent across the waters, the same word used for the spirit that had hovered over the primordial chaos before creation began. The fountains of the deep were closed, the windows of heaven were shut, and the rain was restrained. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, the waters began to recede. The great tide that had swallowed the world began its long retreat. In the 7th month, on the 17th day, the ark came to rest. Its wandering was over. 'Neath its keel, solid ground had risen to meet it, though that ground was still far below the surface. The mountains of Ararat had caught the vessel, cradling it on their slopes while the waters continued to drain away. For more than 2 months, the ark sat motionless while the peaks emerged around it. Dark shapes breaking through the silver surface like the backs of enormous creatures rising for air. On the first day of the 10th month, the tops of other mountains became visible. The world was returning, piece by piece, summit by summit. Noah waited another 40 days, watching through the window near the roof of the ark, seeing more land appear each day. Then he sent out a raven, a dark bird with strong wings, to search for dry land. The raven flew back and forth, never settling, never returning fully to the ark. Perhaps it found floating carrion to sustain it. Perhaps it simply preferred freedom to the confines of the vessel. It brought no useful information. Noah released a dove next, a gentler creature, less able to survive on its own in the wasteland of receding waters. The dove found no place to rest its foot, no branch or stone above the surface, and it returned to him. He reached out his hand and brought it back into the ark, back to safety. 7 days later, he sent it out again. This time, the dove returned in the evening with something in its beak, a freshly plucked olive leaf, green and alive, proof that somewhere out there, trees were emerging from the water, their leaves reaching toward the sun. Life was returning to the world. He waited another 7 days and sent the dove out a third time. It did not return. Somewhere beyond sight, it had found a home, a place to nest, a world worth staying in. Noah removed the covering of the ark and looked out. The surface of the ground was dry, though the earth beneath remained waterlogged and muddy. More weeks passed while the land continued to heal, until finally, on the 27th day of the 2nd month, the earth was fully dry. Noah had been in the ark for over a year, and now the voice that had commanded him to enter commanded him to leave. Day emerged into a world scoured clean. The violence that had filled the earth was gone, buried under layers of sediment, washed into oblivion by waters that had shown no mercy. Noah and his wife stepped onto solid ground, followed by their sons and their sons' wives. The animals poured out after them, every beast and bird and creeping thing dispersing across the empty land to fill it once again. The world was theirs to repopulate, a second chance for creation to flourish. Noah's first act in this new world was worship. He built an altar, the first altar mentioned in Scripture, and he took some of every clean animal and bird and offered burnt offerings upon it. The smoke rose into the sky, a fragrant column ascending toward heaven, carrying with it the gratitude of the survivors and the hope of a new beginning. The offering was accepted, and a promise was made in response. Never again would the ground be cursed because of humanity, though the inclination of the human heart remained evil from youth. The flood had not changed human nature. The same capacity for wickedness that had brought destruction still lurked within the hearts of those who had been preserved. But never again would every living thing be struck down as had been done. As long as the earth endured, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night would not cease. The rhythms of nature would continue, dependable and eternal. Noah and his sons received a blessing, the same words that had been spoken over humanity at the beginning. Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. But the relationship between humans and animals had changed. Fear and dread would now characterize how creatures viewed humanity. Every moving thing that lived would be food. just as the green plants had been given before. Only one restriction remained. They were not to eat flesh with its life still in it, with its blood. Blood represented life, and life belonged ultimately to its creator. Murder was explicitly forbidden, with a new and sobering consequence. Whoever shed human blood, by humans would their blood be shed. The image of the divine still resided in every human being, making each life sacred, making the taking of any life a crime against heaven itself. This was the foundation for justice in the New World, the principle that would undergird every system of law that followed. Human life mattered because it bore the stamp of its maker. Kana was established, the first explicit covenant between the divine and all living creatures. Ha, never again would a flood destroy the earth. K, never again would waters rise to blot out all flesh. This promise extended beyond Noah to every generation that would follow, to every creature that would walk or fly or swim upon the earth. And a sign was given to seal this covenant, a reminder set in the sky for all ages to see. The bow appeared in the clouds, an arc of color spanning from horizon to horizon. Whenever rain clouds gathered, whenever the sky darkened and thunder rolled, this bow would appear as a reminder of the promise. It pointed upward, a weapon laid down, a sign of peace between heaven and earth. Whenever it was seen, the covenant would be remembered, and the waters would never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. The rainbow became a bridge between the storm and the calm, between judgment and mercy, between what had been and what would never be again. Noah became a man of the soil and planted a vineyard. T, the earth that had been cleansed was fertile, and the vines he planted flourished. In time, they produced grapes, and from the grapes came wine. Noah drank of the wine and became drunk, and in his intoxication he lay uncovered within his tent. The man who had walked with the divine, who had preserved life through the great catastrophe, now lay exposed and vulnerable in a stupor of his own making. Ham, the father of Canaan, entered the tent and saw his father's nakedness. What exactly he did there has been debated, but his actions carried a weight of disrespect, perhaps mockery, perhaps something worse. He went out and told his two brothers what he had seen, spreading the shame rather than covering it. Shem and Japheth responded differently. They took a garment, laid it across their shoulders, and walked backward into the tent. Their faces were turned away. Akkad, they did not see their father's nakedness. Akkad, they covered him with respect and dignity. When Noah awoke and learned what his youngest son had done, he spoke words that would echo through generations. Cursed be Canaan, he said, naming Ham's son rather than Ham himself. A servant of servants he would be to his brothers. Blessed be the God of Shem, and let Canaan be his servant. May the divine enlarge Japheth, and let him dwell in the tents of Shem, and let Canaan be his servant. These words shaped the relationships between nations that would descend from these three brothers, setting patterns that would play out across centuries of human history. Noah lived 350 years after the flood and died at the age of 950. His sons spread across the earth, each becoming the father of nations. From Japheth came the peoples of the coastlands, spreading into territories that would become Europe and beyond. From Ham came the peoples of Africa and Canaan, builders of cities and empires. From Shem came the peoples of the east, including the line through which the great promises would eventually flow. The whole earth had one language in those days, one set of words that everyone understood. As people migrated from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. The land was rich and flat, perfect for building, and building was what they determined to do. They said to one another, "Let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly." They had brick for stone and bitite for mortar, and they began to construct. Their ambition grew with every course of bricks laid. "Let us build ourselves a city," they said, "and a tower with its top in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth." The tower rose higher and higher, a monument to human capability, a declaration of independence from any authority above. 3. They would reach heaven on their own terms, by their own efforts, unified in their rebellion. But the divine came down to see the city and the tower that the children of humanity had built. The language is almost ironic. They were building toward heaven, yet heaven had to descend to even see what they were doing. Their great achievement, their tower with its top in the clouds, was small enough that it required a downward journey to observe, and what was observed was troubling. This is only the beginning of what they will do, the assessment concluded. Nothing that they proposed to do would be impossible for them. Human unity in rebellion was a dangerous thing. The same creative capacity that bore the divine image could be turned toward ends that would only multiply the wickedness that had brought the flood. Something had to be done to slow the momentum of this unified defiance. The languages were confused. Where there had been one tongue understood by all, suddenly there were many. Words that had meant one thing now meant another, or meant nothing at all. Builders could not communicate with their laborers. Plans could not be conveyed. The great project ground to a halt as people clustered into groups that could understand each other, looking with suspicion at those who now spoke gibberish in their ears. The city was called Babel, a name that sounded like the word for confusion. The tower stood unfinished, a monument not to human achievement, but to human limitation. And from that place, humanity was scattered across the face of all the earth. They spread in their new language groups, each cluster finding its own territory, developing its own culture, forgetting over time that they had ever been one people with one tongue. The dispersal that they had feared came upon them because they had tried to prevent it. The earth was filled with humanity, but it was a divided humanity, separated by words they could no longer share. Among the descendants of Shem, scattered across the lands of the east, there lived a man named Terah in the city of Ur. This was no small settlement, but a great center of civilization, a place of temples and commerce, where the moon god was worshipped and the arts of writing and mathematics flourished. Terah had 3 sons, Abram, Nar, and Haran. Haran fathered a son named Lot, but died young before his own father, leaving his son an orphan in the bustling streets of Ur. Terah gathered his family and set out from Ur, taking Abram and Abram's wife Sarai, along with his grandson Lot. Their destination was the land of Canaan, far to the west, though what drew them in that direction the ancient texts do not say. Perhaps it was trade, perhaps restlessness, perhaps the faint stirring of a call not yet fully heard. They traveled along the Fertile Crescent, following the rivers that made life possible in those arid lands, until they reached the city of Haran. Their terror stopped. There he settled. There, at the age of 205 years, he died, never reaching the land he had set out to find. It was in Haran that the voice came to Abram, a voice that would change everything. Go from your country, it commanded, and from your kindred and from your father's house, to a land that I will show you. The instruction was vast and vague. Leave everything familiar. Leave the security of family and clan. Journey toward a destination that would only be revealed along the way. It was an invitation to radical trust, to stepping into the unknown with nothing but a promise to guide the way. And the promise was extraordinary. Abram would become a great nation, though he was already 75 years old and his wife had borne no children. He would be blessed, and his name would be great. He would be a blessing to others, and through him all the families of the earth would find blessing. Those who blessed him would be blessed. Those who cursed him would be cursed. The scope of this promise stretched beyond anything Abram could have imagined, reaching forward through centuries to touch peoples and nations not yet born. Abram obeyed. He took Sarai, his wife, and Lot, his nephew, along with all the possessions they had gathered, and the people who had joined their household in Haran. They set out for the land of Canaan, and to Canaan they came. The journey was long, crossing rivers and deserts, passing through territories held by peoples who spoke different tongues and worshipped different gods. When they arrived, they found the land already occupied. The Canaanites were there, established in their cities and villages, tending their fields and flocks. Abram traveled through this land, a stranger passing through territory that belonged to others. At Shechem, at the oak of Moreh, the voice came again. To your offspring I will give this land. The promise had found its geography. This place, these hills and valleys, these plains and rivers belonged to the descendants of a man who had no descendants yet. Abram built an altar there, the first of many altars he would construct to mark the places where heaven touched earth in his wandering life. He moved on to the hill country east of Bethel and pitched his tent between Bethel and Ai. There he built another altar and called upon the sacred name. Then he journeyed on, moving by stages toward the Negev, the dry southern reaches of the land. He was a nomad now, living in tents, following his flocks, never settling permanently, always moving toward something he could not quite see. A famine struck the land, severe enough to threaten survival. The rains had failed, the crops had withered, and the wells were running dry. Abram made the difficult decision to go down to Egypt, where the Nile provided water regardless of rainfall, where granaries held stores against times of scarcity. As they approached that ancient kingdom, fear gripped his heart. Sarai was beautiful, strikingly so, and Abram knew how powerful men dealt with obstacles between themselves and beautiful women. He asked her to say she was his sister. This was a half-truth, for she was indeed his half-sister, the daughter of his father by a different mother. But the intent was deception, protection purchased through dishonesty. If the Egyptians thought she was merely his sister, they would not kill him to take her. They would simply take her, which is exactly what happened. Pharaoh's officials saw her beauty and praised her to their master, and Sarai was taken into the royal household. Abram prospered from this arrangement, receiving sheep and oxen, male and female donkeys, male and female servants, and camels. He grew wealthy while his wife lived in another man's house. Plagues fell upon Pharaoh's household, afflictions that made it clear something was terribly wrong. Somehow, Pharaoh discovered the truth. He summoned Abram and demanded an explanation. What have you done to me? Why did you not tell me she was your wife? The questions were accusations, and Abram had no defense. Pharaoh sent them away, all of them, with everything they had accumulated. Soldiers escorted them to the border, ensuring their departure. Abram left Egypt wealthier than he had entered, but diminished in other ways. The father of blessing had brought curse upon a foreign king through his own cowardice. It was not an auspicious beginning to the great story that was unfolding. He returned to the Negev, then journeyed back to the place between Bethel and Ai, where he had built his altar before. There he called again upon the sacred name, perhaps seeking forgiveness, perhaps simply seeking reassurance that the promises still held despite his failures. Lot was still with him, and both of them had grown wealthy. Their flocks and herds had multiplied until the land could not support them dwelling together. Their herdsmen quarreled over grazing rights and water sources, the inevitable conflicts that arise when resources are scarce and needs are great. Abram proposed a solution. Let there be no strife between us, he said to his nephew, for we are kinsmen. The whole land lay before them. If Lot chose the left, Abram would go right. Okay? If Lot chose the right, Abram would go left. It was a generous offer, giving the younger man the first choice, trusting that the promise would be fulfilled, regardless of which portion fell to Abram. Lot lifted his eyes and surveyed the landscape. To the east lay the Jordan Valley, lush and well-watered, green as the Garden of Eden, fertile as the land of Egypt. To the west lay the hill country, rocky and demanding, requiring harder work for smaller yields. Lot chose the valley. He pitched his tents near Sodom, a city whose reputation for wickedness had already spread throughout the region. The best land, it seemed, came with the worst neighbors. Abram settled in the land of Canaan, while Lot dwelt among the cities of the valley. After his nephew had departed, the voice came again. Lift up your eyes, it commanded, and look in every direction. All the land that you see, I will give to you and your offspring forever. Your offspring will be like the dust of the earth, so numerous that if anyone could count the dust, they could count your descendants. Walk through the land, its length and breadth, for it is all yours. Abram moved his tents to the oaks of Mamre, near Hebron, and built another altar there. He had become a man who marked the landscape with worship, leaving stone monuments to encounters with the invisible God who had called him from yore. War came to the region, a conflict among kings whose names ring strange in modern ears. Amraphel of Shinar, Arioch of Elamor, and Tidal of Goyim made war against Bera of Sodom, Kara of Gomorrah, Shinab of Admah, Shemar of Seboim, and the king of Bala. For 12 years the cities of the valley had served Kedorlaomer, but in the 13th year they rebelled. In the 14th year the eastern kings came to crush the rebellion. The battle took place in the valley of Siddim, a landscape pocked with bitumen pits, natural tar that seeped from the ground. The kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, and some of their men fell into these pits, while others escaped to the hills. The victorious eastern kings plundered Sodom and Gomorrah, taking all their possessions and provisions. They also took Lot, who had been living in Sodom, along with everything he owned. A fugitive escaped and brought word to Abram the Hebrew, the first time this designation appears in Scripture. When Abram heard that his nephew had been captured, he armed his trained men, 318 servants born in his own household, and pursued the raiders. He divided his forces and attacked by night, striking the enemy camp near Damascus. He recovered all the possessions, brought back Lot with his goods, and rescued the women and other captives as well. As he returned from this victory, 2 kings came out to meet him. The king of Sodom met him in the valley of Shaveh, but another king met him first, a mysterious figure whose appearance in the narrative seems almost otherworldly. Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was a priest of the Most High God, a title that transcended the local deities worshipped throughout Canaan. Melchizedek blessed Abram in words that echoed with power. Blessed be Abram by the Most High God, possessor of heaven and earth. And blessed be the Most High God, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. Abram gave him 1/10 of everything, an offering to this priest king, whose origins and lineage the text leaves shrouded in mystery. Salem would later become Jerusalem, and Melchizedek would become a type, foreshadowing of priesthood that transcended the tribal boundaries that would later define worship in Israel. The king of Sodom made a different kind of offer. Give me the people, he said, and keep the goods for yourself. It was a reasonable arrangement, standard practice after military victory. But Abram refused everything. He had raised his hand to the Most High God and sworn an oath. He would take nothing belonging to the king of Sodom. Not a thread, not a sandal strap, nothing that would allow this wicked king to claim he had made Abram rich. Only what his young men had eaten and the share due to his allies would be taken. The rest would be returned. After these things, the word came to Abram in a vision. Fear not, it said, I am your shield and your very great reward. But Abram voiced the ache that had grown sharper with each passing year. What good were rewards when he remained childless? His heir would be Eliezer of Damascus, a servant born in his household, not a son of his own body. The promise of descendants like dust seemed increasingly hollow as he and Sarai grew older. The response came with certainty. This servant would not be the heir. Abram's own son, flesh of his flesh, would inherit everything. He was brought outside into the night and told to look up at the sky. Count the stars if you are able to count them. So shall your offspring be. Abram believed, the face of all evidence to the contrary. In the silence of a childless night, he believed the promise, and this faith was counted to him as righteousness. A covenant was sealed that night in ancient ritual. Abram brought a heifer, a goat, and a ram, each 3 years old, along with a turtle dove and a young pigeon. He cut the larger animals in half and arranged the pieces opposite each other, a corridor of flesh through which covenant partners would walk. Birds of prey descended on the carcasses, and Abram drove them away, guarding the sacrifice as the sun moved toward the horizon. As darkness fell, a deep sleep overtook him, and with it, a dreadful darkness. A prophecy was spoken into this thick gloom. His offspring would be sojourners in a land not their own, servants afflicted for 400 years. But judgment would come upon that nation, and they would come out with great possessions. Abram himself would die in peace at a good old age. In the 4th generation, his descendants would return to this land, for the iniquity of those who currently possessed it was not yet complete. When the sun had set and darkness covered everything, a smoking firepot and a flaming torch passed between the pieces of the sacrifice. It was the divine presence, walking the covenant path alone, taking upon itself the full weight of the promises made. The land was given that day, from the river of Egypt to the great Euphrates, including all the peoples who dwelt within those boundaries. This covenant was unilateral, depending not on Abram's faithfulness, but on the faithfulness of the one who had called him. But Sarai remained barren. 10 years had passed since they entered Canaan, and still no child had come. She had an Egyptian servant named Hagar, acquired perhaps during their sojourn in Pharaoh's land. Sarai made a proposal that seemed reasonable by the customs of that age. She would give Hagar to Abram as a wife. Any child born would be counted as Sarai's own. Perhaps, she said, I shall obtain children through her. Abram listened to his wife's voice and took Hagar. She conceived quickly, and as her belly swelled, so did her contempt for her barren mistress. The servant looked upon the wife with disdain, and Sarai's anguish turned to anger. She blamed Abram for the situation she herself had engineered. May the wrong done to me be on you, she cried. Abram, caught between 2 women in conflict, gave Sarai permission to deal with Hagar as she saw fit. Sarai dealt harshly with her. The text does not specify what form this harshness took, but it was severe enough to drive a pregnant woman into the wilderness. Hagar fled toward her homeland, heading south toward Egypt, when a messenger found her by a spring of water in the desert. Where have you come from? The messenger asked. And where are you going? She answered honestly that she was fleeing from her mistress. She was told to return and submit, a difficult command for a woman who had been mistreated. But promises accompanied the instruction. Her offspring would be multiplied beyond counting. The son in her womb would be named Ishmael, meaning God hears, because her affliction had been heard. He would be a wild donkey of a man, his hand against everyone and everyone's hand against him, dwelling over against all his kinsmen. Hagar named the one who spoke to her with words that carried profound theological weight. You are a God of seeing, she said, for she had seen the one who sees her and lived to tell of it. The well was named Bir Lahai, the well of the living one who sees me. It became a landmark in the wilderness between Kadesh and Bered, a memorial to an encounter between heaven and a runaway slave. She returned as commanded and bore Abram a son. He named the boy Ishmael, just as the messenger had instructed. Abram was 86 years old when Ishmael was born, and for 13 years this son of Hagar would be his only child, the apparent heir to all the promises. But the story was not yet complete. Greater surprises waited in the years ahead. 13 years passed in relative silence. Ishmael grew from infant to boy to young man, learning the ways of the desert, becoming skilled with the bow, a wild and free spirit, roaming the lands around Hebron. Abram watched his son grow, and perhaps wondered if this was the fulfillment of all he had been promised. The boy was flesh of his flesh, born of his own body, heir to his flocks and lands. Perhaps the promise had been fulfilled after all, even if not in the way originally expected. Then When Abram was 99 years old, the voice returned with new demands and new revelations. Walk before me and be blameless, it commanded. A covenant would be established between them, and Abram would be multiplied exceedingly. He fell on his face, prostrate before the presence that addressed him, and listened as his destiny was reshaped with words. His name would no longer be Abram, meaning exalted father. From this day forward, he would be called Abraham, father of a multitude, for he would become the ancestor of many nations. Kings would come from his line. The covenant would be everlasting, extending to his offspring through all their generations. The land of Canaan would be given as an everlasting possession, and the divine would be their God forever. But covenant required a sign, a mark upon the flesh that would set Abraham's descendants apart from all other peoples. Every male among them was to be circumcised, the flesh of the foreskin cut away as a token of the covenant. This applied to those born in the household and those bought with money from foreigners, everyone who belonged to Abraham's extended family. It was to be done on the 8th day after birth, a permanent mark upon the body that could never be hidden or forgotten. Any male who remained uncircumcised had broken the covenant and would be cut off from his people. Sarai's name was changed as well. She would no longer be Sarai, but Sarah, a name meaning princess. She would be blessed and would bear a son. She would become the mother of nations, and kings of peoples would come from her. Abraham fell on his face again, but this time he laughed. The sound escaped him before he could stop it, a laugh of incredulity, of wonder, perhaps of doubt. Could a child be born to a man who was 100 years old? Could Sarah, at 90, bear a son? He spoke aloud the thought that seemed more reasonable. Oh, that Ishmael might live before you. Let the son he already had be the heir. Let the promises flow through the boy who already existed rather than through some impossible future child. But the answer was firm. Sarah would bear a son, and his name would be Isaac, meaning laughter. The covenant would be established with Isaac, not Ishmael. Yet Ishmael would not be forgotten. He too would be blessed, made fruitful, multiplied greatly. Kel princes would descend from him, and he would become a great nation. But the covenant, the special relationship, the line of promise, would pass through Isaac. That very day, Abraham took every male in his household and circumcised them. Camel, 13 years old, received the mark of the covenant. Abraham himself, at 99, underwent the same procedure. Every man and boy, whether born in the house or purchased from foreigners, was circumcised. The household of Abraham became a marked people, set apart by a sign carved into their very flesh. The oaks of Mamre provided shade from the heat of the day when 3 strangers appeared on the horizon. Abraham sat at the entrance of his tent during the hottest hours, resting, as was the custom, when he lifted his eyes and saw them standing nearby. Something moved him to action. He ran from the tent to meet them, bowed to the ground before them, and offered extravagant hospitality. "If I have found favor in your sight," he said, "do not pass by your servant. Let water be brought to wash your feet. Rest under the tree while I bring bread to refresh you. After you have rested, you may continue on your way." The strangers accepted his offer, and Abraham hurried to make it reality. He ran to Sarah in the tent, urging her to quickly prepare fine flour and make cakes. He ran to the herd, selected a tender calf, and gave it to a servant to prepare. He gathered curds and milk and the prepared meat and set it all before his guests. He stood near them under the tree while they ate. They asked about Sarah, using her new name, knowing things that strangers should not know. Abraham told them she was in the tent. Then one of them spoke a promise that made the impossible concrete and immediate. "I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, shall have a son." Sarah was listening at the tent door behind him. She heard these words and laughed within herself. Her laughter was silent, internal, the bitter amusement of an old woman who had long ago given up hope. After I am worn out, she thought, and my Lord is old, shall I have pleasure? The question was rhetorical, expecting no answer, resigned to barrenness. But nothing was hidden from these visitors. Why did Sarah laugh? The question came, is anything too hard for the divine? Ain't the appointed time? Next year, Sarah would have a son. Fear gripped her then. She denied laughing, trying to cover her moment of doubt. The denial was not accepted. No, you did laugh. The words were gentle but firm, acknowledging her doubt while not rescinding the promise. Laughter born of disbelief would become laughter born of joy. The son she would bear had already been named for this very moment. The visitors rose and looked toward Sodom in the distance. Abraham walked with them to see them on their way. As they traveled, a deliberation took place. Should what was about to happen be hidden from Abraham, he would become a great nation, and all peoples would be blessed through him. He had been chosen to command his children and household after him to keep the way of righteousness and justice. Therefore, he would be told. The outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah was great. Their sin was very grave. The divine would go down to see whether they had done altogether according to the outcry that had reached heaven. If not, it would be known. Two of the visitors turned and went towards Sodom, but Abraham remained standing before the one who had spoken. He understood what was about to happen, and his nephew Lot lived in that doomed city. Abraham approached and began to plead, "Would you sweep away the righteous with the wicked? What if there were 50 righteous people in the city? Would the whole place be destroyed for lack of 50 good souls? Should not the judge of all the earth do what is just?" The answer came with patience. If 50 righteous were found in Sodom, the whole place would be spared for their sake. Abraham pressed further, apologizing for his boldness. He was but dust and ashes, yet he dared to speak. What if there were 45? The city would be spared for 45. What if 40? It would be spared for 40. What if 30 for 30? What if 20 for 20? Abraham ventured one last reduction. Let not the Lord be angry, but let me speak just once more. What if 10 should be found there? For the sake of 10, it would not be destroyed. The conversation ended, and Abraham returned to his place. He had bargained the threshold of salvation down to 10 righteous souls. Surely, in a city as large as Sodom, 10 people could be found who had not given themselves over to wickedness. Surely, Lot and his family, at minimum, would meet this standard. Abraham waited to see what would happen to the cities of the plain. The two visitors arrived at Sodom in the evening, finding Lot sitting in the gate of the city. This was the place where business was conducted, where elders gathered, where a man of standing would be found. Lot had risen far since he pitched his tents near Sodom. Now he sat among its leaders, integrated into its society, despite the wickedness that surrounded him. When he saw the two strangers, he rose to meet them, bowing with his face to the ground. He urged them to stay at his house, to wash their feet, to spend the night under his roof. At first, they declined, saying they would spend the night in the town square. But Lot pressed them strongly until they agreed to come with him. He prepared a feast and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. But before they could lie down for the night, the house was surrounded. The men of Sodom, both young and old, from every part of the city, gathered around the house. They called to Lot, demanding that he bring out the visitors so they could know them. The word carried its full, terrible meaning. These men intended violence of the most degrading kind, a mob united in wickedness, proving the outcry against the city had not been exaggerated. Lot went outside and shut the door behind him, pleading with the crowd. "My brothers, do not act so wickedly." In desperation, he offered something almost as terrible, his 2 virgin daughters, to do with as they pleased. "Only leave these men alone, for they have come under the shelter of my roof." The offer reveals how deeply the corruption of Sodom had infected even those who tried to resist it. The mob rejected his offer with contempt. This fellow came to sojourn, they snarled, and now he wants to play judge. They threatened to deal worse with Lot than with his guests, and pressed hard against him, nearly breaking down the door. But hands reached out from inside, pulled Lot to safety, and shut the door. The men outside were struck with blindness, a disorientation so complete that they wore themselves out trying to find the entrance they could no longer see. The visitors revealed their purpose. They had been sent to destroy the city. Lot must gather anyone who belonged to him, sons-in-law and sons and daughters, anyone at all, and get them out before the destruction came. Lot went to his sons-in-law. The men pledged to marry his daughters and told them to flee because the city was about to be destroyed. But he seemed to them to be joking. They did not believe him. They stayed where they were. As dawn approached, the visitors urged Lot to hurry. "Take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here," they said, "lest you be swept away in the punishment of the city." But Lot lingered. Even with destruction imminent, even with angels urging him to flee, he hesitated. The visitors seized him and his wife and his 2 daughters by the hands, mercy overriding his reluctance, and brought them outside the city. The instruction was clear. Flee for your life. Do not look back. Do not stop anywhere in the valley. Escape to the hills or be swept away. Lot protested, even then, saying he could not flee to the hills. That disaster would overtake him and he would die. He begged to be allowed to flee to a small city nearby, a little place called Zor. The request was granted. The destruction would wait until he reached safety. The sun had risen over the land when Lot entered Zor. Then it began. Fire and sulfur rained from the heavens upon Sodom and Gomorrah. The cities that had filled the earth with their wickedness were consumed in a storm of burning destruction. The valley that had once looked like the Garden of Eden, lush and well-watered, became a wasteland of smoke and ash. Everything was overthrown, the cities and all the valley and all the inhabitants and everything that grew on the ground. Lot's wife looked back. Perhaps she longed for the home she was leaving, for the possessions abandoned, for the life she had known. Perhaps she doubted the destruction was real. Perhaps she simply could not resist the urge to see. Whatever her reason, she turned and looked, and she became a pillar of salt. She stood frozen on the plain, a monument to disobedience, while her husband and daughters continued their flight. Abraham rose early that morning and went to the place where he had stood before the presence of the Most High. He looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah, toward all the land of the valley, and saw smoke rising from the earth like the smoke of a furnace. 10 righteous had not been found. The city had been destroyed. But Lot had been remembered. In the midst of judgment, mercy had pulled him from the flames. Lot was afraid to stay in Zoar, despite having begged to go there. He went up into the hills with his 2 daughters and lived in a cave. The world they had known was gone, the cities destroyed, their mother turned to salt. The daughters looked at their situation and saw no hope for the future. There was no man on earth to marry them in the normal way, no prospect of children or legacy. They devised a plan, born of desperation and the twisted values they had absorbed in Sodom. They would make their father drink wine until he lost awareness, and then they would lie with him to preserve offspring. The older daughter went in first, and Lot did not know when she lay down or when she arose. So the next night, the younger daughter did the same. Both conceived by their father, who remained unaware of what had happened. The older daughter bore a son and named him Moab, father of the Moabites. The younger daughter bore a son and named him Benami, father of the Ammonites. These nations would become neighbors to Israel in the centuries ahead, sometimes allies and sometimes enemies. Their origin story a testament to the far-reaching consequences of Sodom's corruption. What had seemed like survival became the seed of future conflict. And the cave in the hills became the birthplace of peoples who would trouble Abraham's descendants for generations to come. Abraham journeyed from the oaks of Mamre toward the region of the Negeb, settling for a time between Kadesh and Shur. He sojourned in Gerar, a territory ruled by a king named Abimelech. And there, incredibly, he repeated the same deception that had caused such trouble in Egypt decades before. He said of Sarah, "She is my sister." Despite all that had happened, despite the promises and covenants and miraculous announcements, fear still gripped him when he thought of powerful men and his beautiful wife. Abimelech sent for Sarah and took her into his household. But before any harm could come to her, a warning came to the king in a dream. "You are a dead man," the voice declared, "because of the woman you have taken, for she is a man's wife." Abimelech had not yet approached her, and he pleaded his innocence. He had been told she was Abraham's sister. His hands were clean. His heart was pure in this matter. The innocence was acknowledged, and Abimelech was told that he had been kept from sinning. He must return Sarah to her husband, for Abraham was a prophet who would pray for him. If he did not return her, he would surely die, along with all who belonged to him. The king rose early and told his servants everything. They were filled with fear. He summoned Abraham and demanded an explanation, asking what wrong had been done to deserve such treatment. What thoughts had led to such deception? Abraham explained his reasoning. He had assumed there was no fear of God in this place, that they would kill him for his wife. Besides, she truly was his sister, the daughter of his father, though not his mother. When they left his father's house to wander, he had asked her to show this kindness, to call him brother wherever they went. Abimelech restored Sarah and gave Abraham sheep and oxen and servants. He offered his land for Abraham to dwell wherever he pleased. Sarah he gave 1,000 pieces of silver as vindication before all. Abraham prayed, and the household of Abimelech was healed of the affliction that had closed every womb among them. The promise came due at last. The divine visited Sarah, as had been said, and she conceived and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the very time that had been spoken. Abraham was 100 years old when Isaac came into the world, this child of impossibility, this son of laughter. On the 8th day, as commanded, Abraham circumcised his son, marking him with the sign of the covenant, bringing him into the promise that would flow through his descendants forever. Sarah spoke words of wonder and joy. "God has made laughter for me," she said. "Everyone who hears will laugh with me." Who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age. The bitter laughter of disbelief had transformed into the bright laughter of fulfillment. The name Isaac captured this transformation, a perpetual reminder that what seems impossible to human eyes remains possible to the one who makes promises. The child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on that day. But Sarah saw something that troubled her deeply. Ishmael, the son of Hagar the Egyptian, was laughing. The same word used for the joyful laughter surrounding Isaac's birth now carried darker overtones. Perhaps it was mockery. Perhaps it was merely the play of an older brother with a younger one. But Sarah saw threat in it. "Cast out this slave woman with her son," she demanded. "For the son of this slave shall not be heir with my son Isaac." The demand was deeply distressing to Abraham. Whatever tensions existed in the household, Ishmael was his son, his firstborn, the boy he had raised and loved for nearly 17 years. But reassurance came from above. "Whatever Sarah says to you, do as she tells you. Through Isaac your offspring shall be named." But the son of the slave woman would also become a nation, because he too was Abraham's offspring. Abraham rose early the next morning, took bread and a skin of water, gave them to Hagar. He put the provisions on her shoulder, along with the child, and sent her away. The scene is heartbreaking in its brevity. No recorded words of farewell, no lingering goodbye, just bread and water and a long walk into the wilderness. She wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba until the water ran out. When the skin was empty, Hagar put Ishmael under one of the bushes to shade him from the merciless sun. She went and sat down opposite him, a bow shot away, because she could not bear to watch her son die. She lifted up her voice and wept, the sound of a mother's despair echoing across the empty desert. But another sound rose as well. The boy was crying, and his cries were heard in heaven. A voice called to Hagar from above. "What troubles you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the boy where he is." The promise was repeated. Ishmael would become a great nation. And then her eyes were opened, and she saw what had been there all along. A well of water stood before her, hidden until this moment of revelation. She filled the skin and gave the boy a drink. Life flowed back into them both. Ishmael grew up in the wilderness of Paran, becoming an expert with the bow, a hunter and survivor in the harsh desert lands. His mother found him a wife from her homeland of Egypt, connecting him to her people, establishing a line that would indeed become a great nation. The son of the slave woman would father princes, just as had been promised, even though the covenant would pass through his younger brother. Years passed in relative peace. Isaac grew from infant to boy to young man, the beloved son of aged parents, the child of promise through whom all the nations of the earth would be blessed. Then came the test, the most terrible trial recorded in the book of beginnings. The voice that had called Abraham from Ur, that had promised him land and descendants, that had announced the birth of Isaac, now spoke again with a command that seemed to contradict everything that had come before. "Take your son," the voice said, "your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah. There, on one of the mountains, offer him as a burnt offering." The words were clear, unavoidable, devastating. The son for whom Abraham had waited 100 years. The child through whom all the promises would be fulfilled must be sacrificed on an altar of stone. How this command could be reconciled with everything else Abraham had been told, he did not know. But he had learned to trust the voice that had never failed him. Abraham rose early in the morning and saddled his donkey. He cut wood for the burnt offering and took 2 of his young men along with Isaac his son. They set out for the place that had been designated. For 3 days they traveled, 3 days of walking beside the son he had been commanded to kill. 3 days of silence and dread, and perhaps a desperate hope that somehow this cup would pass. On the 3rd day, Abraham lifted his eyes and saw the place in the distance. He told the young man to stay with the donkey while he and the boy went further to worship. His words contained either faith or deception, perhaps both intertwined. "We will come back to you," he said. "We, not I." Even as he prepared to obey, he held on to the possibility of return. Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac's back. He carried the fire and the knife himself, the dangerous items too important to entrust to anyone else. Father and son walked on together. Isaac broke the silence with a question that must have pierced Abraham's heart. "Father, I see the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham's answer has echoed through the ages. "God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering, my son." They came to the place, and Abraham built an altar. He arranged the wood upon it. Then he bound Isaac his son and laid him on the altar, on top of the wood. The boy did not resist. He was young and strong, certainly capable of overpowering his aged father, but he submitted to the binding. He lay upon the wood he had carried up the mountain, watching as his father reached out and took the knife. Abraham's hand was raised to slaughter his son when a voice called from heaven. "Abraham, Abraham." The repetition carried urgency, and Abraham answered immediately. "Here I am. Do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him," the voice commanded. "For now I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." Abraham lifted his eyes and saw a ram caught in a thicket by its horns. God had indeed provided. The lamb had been there all along, waiting for this moment, hidden until the test was complete. Abraham took the ram and offered it as a burnt offering instead of his son. He named that place, "The Lord will provide." And it was said for generations afterward that on the mount of the Lord it shall be provided. The voice spoke again, confirming the covenant with even greater emphasis. Because Abraham had done this thing, because he had not withheld his only son, blessing would be multiplied upon blessing. His offspring would be like the stars of heaven and the sand on the seashore. They would possess the gates of their enemies. In his offspring, all the nations of the earth would be blessed, because he had obeyed this most difficult command. Abraham returned to his young men, and they went together to Beersheba. There Abraham dwelt, but the years were taking their toll. Sarah had lived 127 years when death came for her at Kiriath Arba, which is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. Abraham came to mourn for her and to weep over her, grieving the companion who had shared his long journey from Ur through Egypt and Canaan, through barrenness and fulfillment. He rose from beside his dead and spoke to the Hittites who controlled that region. He was a sojourner and foreigner among them, a wanderer who owned no land despite all the promises. He needed a burial place, a piece of ground where he could lay Sarah to rest. The Hittites responded with respect, calling him a prince of God among them. They offered him any tomb he chose. None would withhold a burial site from him. Abraham bowed before the people of the land and made a specific request. He wanted the cave of Machpelah, which belonged to Ephron's son of Zohar. It was at the end of Ephron's field, and Abraham would pay the full price for it. Ephron was present in the assembly and offered to give Abraham both the field and the cave as a gift. But Abraham insisted on paying. He weighed out 400 shekels of silver, the price Ephron had named in the hearing of all, and the transaction was complete. The field and the cave and all the trees within its borders became Abraham's possession, legally purchased before witnesses. He buried Sarah there in the cave of Machpelah, in the first piece of the promised land that he actually owned. The purchase was modest, just enough ground for a grave, but it was a foothold, a beginning, a tangible stake in the future that had been promised. Abraham was old, well advanced in years, and the time had come to secure the next generation. He called his oldest servant, the one who managed all he had, and gave him a solemn charge. He must not take a wife for Isaac from among the Canaanites. Instead, he must journey back to Abraham's homeland, to his relatives, and find a wife there. The servant asked what should happen if the woman refused to come to this distant land. Should he take Isaac back to Mesopotamia? Abraham was emphatic. Isaac must never go back there. The God who had called Abraham from his father's house, who had promised this land to his offspring, would send a messenger ahead to ensure success. The woman would not come. The servant would be released from his oath. But under no circumstances was Isaac to be taken back to the land from which Abraham had been called. The servant placed his hand under Abraham's thigh and swore to fulfill this mission. He took 10 camels loaded with good things from his master's possessions and set out for the city of Nar in Mesopotamia. He arrived toward evening, at the time when women came out to draw water, and made his camels kneel beside the well outside the city. He prayed for guidance, asking for a specific sign. He would ask a young woman for a drink. If she offered water to him and also to his camels, she would be the one chosen for Isaac. Before he had finished praying, Rebekah appeared with her jar upon her shoulder. She was beautiful, a virgin, the daughter of Bethuel, who was the son of Nar, Abraham's brother. She went down to the spring, filled her jar, and came up. The servant ran to meet her and asked for water. She lowered her jar and gave him a drink, then offered to draw water for his camels until they had finished drinking. 10 camels drank an enormous amount after a long journey. Yet she worked without complaint, running back and forth to the well. The servant watched in silence, wondering whether his journey had succeeded. When the camels had finished, he brought out gold jewelry, a ring for her nose, and bracelets for her arms. He asked whose daughter she was, and whether there was room in her father's house for him to stay. She identified herself as the granddaughter of Nar, Abraham's brother, and assured him there was plenty of room and fodder. The servant bowed his head and worshipped, blessing the God who had led him directly to his master's relatives. Rebekah ran home to tell her family what had happened. Her brother Laban saw the ring and bracelets and heard her account. He rushed out to the well, inviting the stranger to come in, declaring that the house was prepared and there was room for the camels. The servant entered and was given water to wash his feet. Food was set before him, but he would not eat until he had told his errand. He recounted everything: Abraham's wealth and blessing, the birth of Isaac, the oath he had sworn, the prayer at the well, and Rebekah's exact fulfillment of the sign. He asked for their answer, but they show steadfast love to his master and give Rebekah to be Isaac's wife. Laban and Bethuel answered that this thing had come from heaven. They could not speak bad or good against it. Rebekah was before him. Let her go and become the wife of Abraham's son. The servant worshipped again, then brought out silver and gold jewelry and garments for Rebekah, along with costly gifts for her brother and mother. They ate and drank and spent the night. In the morning, the servant was eager to return, but Rebekah's family asked for delay, 10 days at least. He urged them not to detain him, since his mission had succeeded. They called Rebekah and asked her directly, "Will you go with this man?" Her answer was simple and brave: "I will go." They blessed her as she departed, praying that she would become thousands of 10,000s, and that her offspring would possess the gates of those who hated them. She and her young women mounted the camels and followed the servant back toward Canaan. Isaac had gone out to meditate in the field toward evening when he lifted his eyes and saw camels approaching. Rebekah lifted her eyes and saw him. She asked who that man was, walking through the field to meet them. When she learned it was Isaac, she dismounted and covered herself with a veil. The servant told Isaac everything that had happened. Isaac brought Rebekah into his mother Sarah's tent. He took her as his wife, and he loved her. Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. Abraham took another wife in his latter years, a woman named Keturah, who bore him 6 sons. Their names would become the names of peoples and territories stretching to the east and south. But Abraham gave all he had to Isaac. To the sons of his concubines, he gave gifts and sent them away eastward, separating them from the son of promise while he was still living. When death finally came for Abraham, he was 175 years old. As an old man full of years gathered to his people in peace. Isaac and Ishmael together buried their father in the cave of Machpelah, beside Sarah, in the field that Abraham had purchased from the Hittites. The 2 brothers, separated in childhood, reunited for this solemn duty. After Abraham's death, the blessing passed to Isaac, who settled near Bir Hai Ari, the well where an angel had once spoken to a desperate slave woman fleeing into the wilderness. Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah, and like his mother before her, his wife was barren. The pattern that had defined Abraham's life now repeated in the next generation. Isaac prayed for his wife, pleading with heaven for the child that would not come. His prayer was answered, and Rebekah conceived, but the pregnancy was troubled from the beginning. The children struggled within her, wrestling in the womb with such violence that she cried out in distress. "If it is thus," she asked, "why is this happening to me?" She inquired of the divine and received an oracle that would shape everything that followed. 2 nations were in her womb. 2 peoples would be divided from her body. One would be stronger than the other, and the older would serve the younger. The natural order of inheritance, the right of the firstborn, would be reversed. When the time came to give birth, there were indeed twins. The first emerged red all over, his body covered with hair like a garment of fur. They named him Esau. His brother came out immediately after, his hand grasping Esau's heel, as if trying to pull him back or pull himself forward. They named him Jacob, a name that sounded like the word for heel and carried undertones of supplanting, of grasping, of taking what belonged to another. The boys grew into men as different as two brothers could be. Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the field, at home in the wild places where game roamed. He was his father's favorite, for Isaac loved the taste of wild game that Esau brought home from his hunts. Jacob was a quiet man, dwelling in tents, tending flocks, staying close to the encampment. He was his mother's favorite, and Rebekah remembered the oracle that had promised the older would serve the younger. One day, Jacob was cooking stew when Esau came in from the field, exhausted and famished. The smell of the red lentils simmering over the fire was more than Esau could bear. "Let me eat some of that red stew," he demanded, "for I am exhausted." The red stew gave him another name, Edom, which would become the name of his descendants and their territory. Jacob saw an opportunity. "Sell me your birthright first," he said. The birthright was no small thing. It meant a double portion of inheritance, leadership of the family, the spiritual authority that passed from father to firstborn son. But Esau was thinking only of his immediate hunger. "I'm about to die," he said with dramatic exaggeration. "What use is a birthright to me?" Jacob pressed for a formal agreement. "Swear to me first." So Esau swore an oath, selling his birthright to his younger brother for a bowl of lentil stew and some bread. He ate and drank and rose and went his way. The text notes with devastating brevity. Thus Esau despised his birthright. What had been precious he had traded for a single meal. The heel grasper had gained ground. Famine came to the land, as it had in Abraham's day. Isaac considered going down to Egypt, but a warning came to him. "Do not go to Egypt. Stay in this land, and I will be with you and bless you." The promises made to Abraham were confirmed to his son. All these lands would be given to his offspring. His descendants would be multiplied like the stars of heaven. In his offspring, all the nations of the earth would be blessed. Isaac obeyed and settled in Gerar. There, like his father before him, twice over, Isaac claimed that Rebekah was his sister. The same fear, the same deception, passed from generation to generation. But Abimelech, the king, looked out his window and saw Isaac laughing with Rebekah in a way that revealed they were more than siblings. The king confronted Isaac, recognizing the danger that had nearly befallen his household. Isaac was rebuked but allowed to stay, and he prospered greatly, becoming so wealthy that the Philistines envied him. He reopened the wells that Abraham had dug, wells that the Philistines had stopped up with earth after Abraham's death. He gave them the same names his father had given them, reclaiming his inheritance one well at a time. New wells were dug, and disputes arose over water rights, until finally he dug a well that no one contested. He called it Rehoboth, meaning broad places, for now there was room enough. Isaac grew old, and his eyes grew dim until he could no longer see. He called Esau his firstborn, his favorite, and told him that death might come any day. He asked Esau to go hunting, to prepare the savory food that Isaac loved, so that he might eat and bless his son before he died. Esau took his weapons and went out to the field to hunt game for his father. Rebekah had been listening. As soon as Esau departed, she called Jacob and told him what she had heard. She had a plan. Jacob must fetch 2 young goats from the flock. She would prepare them the way Isaac loved. Jacob would bring the food to his father and receive the blessing meant for Esau. The oracle would be fulfilled through deception. Jacob hesitated, but not from moral qualms. His concern was practical. Esau was hairy, and Jacob was smooth-skinned. If Isaac touched him, the deception would be discovered, and Jacob would bring a curse upon himself rather than a blessing. Rebekah had an answer for everything. "Let your curse be on me, my son. Just obey my voice and go." Jacob brought the goats, and Rebekah prepared the food. She took Esau's best garments, the clothes that carried his scent, and put them on Jacob. She covered his hands and the smooth part of his neck with the goatskins, giving him the hairy texture of his brother. She placed the savory food and bread in his hands and sent him to his father. Jacob entered his father's presence with a lie on his lips. "My father," Isaac answered, "here I am." "Who are you, my son?" The deception began. "I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you told me. Please sit up and eat of my game, that your soul may bless me." Isaac was suspicious. "How is it that you found it so quickly, my son?" Jacob piled lie upon lie. "Because the Lord your God granted me success." Isaac asked his son to come near so he could feel him, to determine whether he was really Esau or not. Jacob approached, and his father touched him. "Okay, the voice is Jacob's voice," Isaac said. "Up the hands are the hands of Esau." He did not recognize him because his hands were hairy like his brother's hands. "Okay." He asked again, "Are you really my son Esau?" And Jacob said, "I am." Isaac ate the food and drank the wine his son brought him. Then he asked Jacob to come near and kiss him. Jacob came close, and Isaac smelled the smell of his garments, the scent of the field that clung to Esau's clothes. Satisfied at last, he blessed his son with words of power and permanence. "May God give you of the dew of heaven and of the fatness of the earth, and plenty of grain and wine. Let peoples serve you, and nations bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be everyone who blesses you." The blessing of abundance, dominion, and divine protection flowed from father to son, irrevocable once spoken. Jacob had scarcely left his father's presence when Esau returned from his hunting. He prepared savory food and brought it to Isaac. "Let my father arise and eat of his son's game, that you may bless me." Isaac trembled violently. "Who are you?" "I am your son," Esau replied, "your firstborn." "Then, who was it?" Isaac asked. "Who hunted game and brought it to me?" "I ate it all before you came, and I blessed him. Yes, and he shall be blessed." Esau's cry was great and bitter. "Bless me, even me also, O my father." But Isaac could only confirm what had happened. "Your brother came deceitfully and took away your blessing." Esau spoke with bitterness. "See, not rightly named Jacob, for he has cheated me these 2 times. He took away my birthright, and now he has taken away my blessing. Have you not reserved a blessing for me?" Has given Jacob lordship over his brothers. He had given him grain and wine. What was left to give? Esau wept aloud, begging for something, anything. Isaac spoke a lesser blessing, more like a prophecy of hardship. Esau would dwell away from the fatness of the earth, away from the dew of heaven. By his sword he would live, and he would serve his brother. But one day, when he grew restless, he would break the yoke from his neck. Esau hated Jacob because of the stolen blessing. He consoled himself with plans of vengeance. "Days of mourning for my father are approaching," he said in his heart. "Then I will kill my brother." But Rebekah heard of his intentions. She warned Jacob to flee to her brother Laban in Haran. "Stay with him until your brother's fury turns away, until he forgets what you have done. Then I will send and bring you back. Why should I be bereft of you both in one day?" She approached Isaac with a different argument. She was weary of her life because of the Hittite women Esau had married. If Jacob married one of them, what good would her life be? Isaac called Jacob, blessed him again, and charged him not to take a wife from the Canaanites. He must go to Padanaram, to the house of Bethuel, and take a wife from among the daughters of Laban. "May God Almighty bless you and make you fruitful and multiply you," Isaac said, "and may you inherit the blessing of Abraham." Jacob departed toward Haran, a fugitive from his brother's wrath. He came to a certain place as the sun was setting and stopped for the night. He took one of the stones of that place, put it under his head, and lay down to sleep. And he dreamed. A ladder was set up on the earth, and the top of it reached to heaven. Angels were ascending and descending on it, a constant flow of heavenly messengers moving between realms. Above it stood the Lord, who spoke words that echoed the promises given to Abraham and Isaac. The land on which Jacob lay would be given to him and his offspring. His descendants would be like the dust of the earth, spreading in every direction. In him and his offspring all the families of the earth would be blessed. I am with you, the voice declared, and will keep you wherever you go. I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised. Jacob awoke, trembling. Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. He was afraid. How awesome is this place! This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. He took the stone he had used as a pillow, set it up as a pillar, and poured oil on top of it. He called the place Bethel, house of God. He made a vow that if God would be with him, if he would return safely to his father's house, then the Lord would be his God. Jacob continued his journey to the land of the people of the east. He came to a well in a field where 3 flocks of sheep lay waiting. A great stone covered the mouth of the well, and the shepherds would roll it away only when all the flocks had gathered. Jacob asked the shepherds where they were from. They were from Haran. He asked if they knew Laban the son of Nar. They did. And look, they said, here comes his daughter Rachel with the sheep. Jacob saw Rachel approaching with her father's flock. Something moved within him. He went to the well, rolled the great stone from its mouth by himself, and watered the flock of Laban. Then he kissed Rachel and wept aloud. He told her he was her father's relative, Rebekah's son. She ran to tell her father. Laban rushed out to meet his sister's son, embracing him, kissing him, bringing him to his house. Jacob stayed a month, working alongside his uncle's household. Then Laban asked what wages Jacob wanted. It was not right, Laban said, for Jacob to work for nothing, simply because they were relatives. Laban had 2 daughters, Leah was the older, and her eyes were weak or tender, the meaning uncertain. Rachel was the younger, beautiful in form and appearance. Jacob loved Rachel. He offered to work 7 years for her hand in marriage. Laban agreed that it was better to give her to Jacob than to some other man. Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him but a few days because of the love he had for her. When the time was complete, he asked for his wife. Laban gathered all the people of the place and made a feast. But in the evening, in the darkness, he brought Leah to Jacob instead of Rachel. Jacob did not discover the deception until morning light revealed the wrong sister lying beside him. He confronted Laban in anger. What is this you have done to me? Did I not serve you for Rachel? Why have you deceived me? The deceiver had been deceived. The man who had worn his brother's clothes and pretended to be someone else now found himself married to the wrong woman through the same kind of trickery. Laban had an answer ready. It is not done in our country to give the younger before the firstborn. Complete the wedding week with Leah, and then you may have Rachel also, in exchange for another 7 years of service. Jacob agreed. Let's finish Leah's week, and then Laban gave him Rachel as well. His 2 wives, 2 sisters, and 14 years of labor. Leah was unloved, or loved less. Her position painfully clear. Her womb was opened while Rachel remained barren. Leah bore Reuben, saying, surely now my husband will love me. She bore Simeon, saying, the Lord heard that I am hated. She bore Levi, hoping now my husband will be attached to me. She bore Judah, saying, this time I will praise the Lord, for sons in quick succession. Each name carrying her longing for love and her gradual turn toward gratitude. Rachel envied her sister and demanded that Jacob give her children. Jacob's anger burned. Am I in the place of God, who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb? Rachel gave him her servant Bilhah, following the pattern Sarah had established generations before. Bilhah bore Dan and Naphtali. Leah responded by giving Jacob her servant Zilpah, who bore Gad and Asher. The household swelled with children, born to 4 different women. The 12 tribes of Israel, taking shape through rivalry and desperation, in the mysterious workings of providence. Leah found mandrakes in the field during wheat harvest, plants believed to promote fertility, and brought them to her mother. Rachel wanted them desperately and bargained with her sister for them. In exchange for the mandrakes, Leah would have Jacob that night. When Jacob came in from the field, Leah met him with the announcement that she had hired him with her son's mandrakes. She conceived and bore a fifth son, Issachar, then a sixth son, Zebulun, then a daughter, Dinah. 7 children Leah had borne while Rachel remained childless. At last, Rachel's prayers were answered. God remembered her, opened her womb, and she conceived and bore a son. She named him Joseph, saying, God has taken away my reproach. May the Lord add to me another son. The beloved wife had finally become a mother, and the family that would become a nation was nearly complete. Jacob had served Laban for 20 years. He had worked 14 years for his 2 wives, and additional years for flocks that never seemed to become truly his. Every time he accumulated wealth, Laban changed the terms. The relationship had soured, and Jacob could see that Laban's attitude toward him had changed. The voice that had spoken at Bethel spoke again. Return to the land of your fathers and to your kindred, and I will be with you. Jacob called Rachel and Leah to the field and laid out his case. He had served their father faithfully, but Laban had cheated him and changed his wages 10 times. His only divine protection had prevented total loss. Now he had been commanded to return to the land of his birth. The sisters supported him completely. Their father had treated them as foreigners, had sold them, and used up all the money. Whatever wealth Jacob had accumulated belonged to them and their children. They urged him to do whatever God had told him. Jacob gathered everything he owned. He set his wives and children on camels, drove all his livestock before him, and fled while Laban was away shearing sheep. Rachel, unbeknownst to Jacob, stole her father's household gods, small idols that may have represented inheritance rights or simply protective deities she was reluctant to leave behind. They crossed the Euphrates and headed toward the hill country of Gilead. 3 days passed before Laban learned that Jacob had fled. He gathered his kinsmen and pursued for 7 days until he caught up with them in Gilead. But the night before the confrontation, a warning came to Laban in a dream. Be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. The divine hand that protected Jacob reached even into the dreams of his pursuer. Laban caught up with Jacob in the hill country. His complaints poured out in wounded indignation. Why did you flee secretly and trick me? Why did you not tell me so I could send you off with celebration, with songs and tambourines and lyres? You did not even let me kiss my grandchildren and daughters goodbye. You have done foolishly. 'Tis in my power to do you harm, but the God of your father spoke to me last night and restrained me. I understand you longed for your father's house, but why did you steal my gods? Jacob answered the accusations, one by one. He had fled in secret because he was afraid Laban would take his daughters by force. As for the stolen gods, Jacob knew nothing of them. He pronounced a death sentence on whoever had taken them. Search whatever you like. Laban searched Jacob's tent, Leah's tent, the tents of the 2 servants, found nothing. Then he entered Rachel's tent. Rachel had hidden the household gods in a camel's saddle and was sitting on it. She apologized for not rising to greet her father, claiming the way of women was upon her. Laban searched the entire tent and found nothing. The stolen gods remained hidden beneath his daughter. And Rachel's deception succeeded where her husband's innocence would have condemned her. Jacob's anger finally erupted. What is my offense? What is my sin that you have hotly pursued me? 20 years I have been in your house. I served 14 years for your daughters and 6 years for your flock. You changed my wages 10 times. The heat consumed me by day, and the frost by night, and sleep fled from my eyes. If the God of my father had not been on my side, you would have sent me away empty-handed. God saw my affliction in the labor of my hands and rebuked you last night. Laban made one last claim. The daughters are my daughters. The children are my children. The flocks are my flocks. Everything you see is mine. But what can I do about it? He proposed a covenant instead, a treaty between them that would govern their relationship going forward. They gathered stones and made a heap, and they ate there by the heap. Laban called it by an Aramaic name, and Jacob called it Galeed. Both names meant the same thing, witness heap. The heap of stones marked a boundary. Laban would not pass beyond it to harm Jacob, and Jacob would not pass beyond it to harm Laban. Jacob swore by the fear of his father Isaac. He offered a sacrifice on the mountain, and they shared a meal. Early in the morning, Laban kissed his grandchildren and daughters, blessed them, and departed for home. The 20-year sojourn in the east was over. Jacob continued toward Canaan, and angels met him on the way. When he saw them, he declared that this was the camp of God, and named the place Mehanam, meaning 2 camps. But a greater concern weighed on his mind. He was returning to the land where Esau lived, the brother who had vowed to kill him, the brother he had not seen in 2 decades. Akish sent messengers ahead to Esau in the land of Seir, the country of Edom. The messengers returned with news that made Jacob's blood run cold. Esau was coming to meet him, and 400 men were with him. Such a force could only mean one thing in Jacob's frightened mind. His brother was coming for vengeance. He divided his people and flocks into 2 camps, reasoning that if Esau attacked one, the other might escape. Then Jacob prayed, perhaps the most desperate prayer recorded in the book of beginnings. O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, you who told me to return. I am not worthy of the least of all the mercies you have shown. With only my staff, I crossed this Jordan, and now I have become 2 camps. Please deliver me from my brother, for I fear he will come and attack us all. Yet you said you would do me good and make my offspring like the sand of the sea. He spent that night preparing an elaborate gift for his brother: 200 female goats and 20 male goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 milking camels with their young, 40 cows and 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys and 10 male donkeys. Divided them into droves, with space between each group, instructing his servants to tell Esau that these were gifts from his servant Jacob, who was coming behind. Wave after wave of livestock would precede him, softening his brother's heart with generosity. Jacob sent the gifts across the stream, then sent his wives and children and everything he had. He was left alone on the far bank as darkness fell. And a man wrestled with him there until the breaking of the day. Through the long night they grappled, neither gaining decisive advantage, locked in a struggle whose meaning Jacob could not comprehend. As dawn approached, the stranger saw that he had not prevailed. He touched Jacob's hip socket, and Jacob's hip was thrown out of joint. Let me go, the stranger said, for the day has broken. But Jacob held on with desperate strength. I will not let you go unless you bless me. The stranger asked his name. Jacob, he answered, the heel grabber, the supplanter, the man who had spent his life grasping for what he wanted. Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, the stranger declared, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed. Jacob asked for the stranger's name in return, but received only a question. Why do you ask my name? Then he blessed him there, the blessing Jacob had demanded as the price of release. Jacob named the place Peniel, face of God, for he had seen God face to face, and his life had been preserved. The sun rose upon him as he passed Peniel, limping because of his hip. He would carry that limp for the rest of his days, a permanent reminder of the night he had wrestled with the divine and refused to let go. His descendants would not eat the sinew of the hip that is on the socket because of what happened at that river crossing. Jacob lifted his eyes and saw Esau coming with his 400 men. He arranged his family in order of increasing preciousness to him. The servants and their children went first, then Leah and her children, and Rachel and Joseph last. Jacob himself went ahead of them all, bowing to the ground 7 times as he approached his brother. Esau ran to meet him. He embraced him, fell on his neck, and kissed him. They wept together. The brother who had been wronged, and the brother who had wronged him, years of bitterness dissolving in tears. Esau looked at the women and children and asked who they were. Jacob introduced his family, each group coming forward and bowing before the uncle they had never met. Esau asked about all the droves he had met along the way. God explained they were gifts to find favor in his brother's sight. But Esau protested. I have enough, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself. Jacob insisted. Please accept my blessing, for God has dealt graciously with me, and I have enough. He urged until Esau accepted. Esau offered to travel together to provide an escort on the journey. Jacob declined, citing the slow pace needed for the children and nursing animals. Go on ahead, he suggested. Jacob will come along slowly and meet you in Seir. Esau departed, but Jacob did not follow him south. Instead, he journeyed to Sukkot, built a house, and made booths for his livestock. He had reconciled with his brother, but he did not choose to live alongside him. Jacob came safely to Shechem in the land of Canaan and camped before the city, bought a piece of land from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem, for 100 pieces of money. There he erected an altar and called it God, the God of Israel, using for the first time the new name that had been given to him at the river. Dinah, the daughter Leah had borne, went out to see the women of the land. Shechem, the son of Hamor, saw her and took her and lay with her and humiliated her. His soul was drawn to her, and he loved her and spoke tenderly to her. He asked his father to get this girl for him as a wife. Jacob heard what had happened, but held his peace until his sons came in from the field. When they heard, they were furious. Such a thing must not be done. Hamor came to negotiate. My son's heart longs for your daughter. Please give her to him as a wife, intermarry with us. Give us your daughters, and take our daughters for yourselves. Dwell with us. The land is open before you. Shechem added his own plea. Let me find favor in your eyes, and whatever you say, I will give. Ask me for as great a bride price as you want. I will give whatever you ask. Only give me the young woman as my wife. Jacob's sons answered deceitfully. They could not give their sister to an uncircumcised man, for that would be a disgrace. But if every male among them would be circumcised, then they would intermarry, become one people, and dwell together. Hamor and Shechem found this acceptable. They convinced the men of their city to undergo the procedure. Every male was circumcised. On the 3rd day, when the men were still sore and weakened from the surgery, Simeon and Levi took their swords and fell upon the unsuspecting city. They killed every male, including Hamor and Shechem. They took Dinah from Shechem's house and left. Jacob's other sons plundered the city, seizing flocks and herds, donkeys and wealth, women and children. Jacob was horrified. You have brought trouble on me, he told Simeon and Levi. You have made me stink to the inhabitants of the land. I am few in number. They gather against me and attack. I shall be destroyed. But the brothers had only one answer. Should he treat our sister like a prostitute? The voice came to Jacob again. Arise, go up to Bethel and dwell there. Make an altar to the God who appeared to you when you fled from your brother Esau. Jacob told his household to put away the foreign gods among them, to purify themselves, and to change their garments. They would go to Bethel, where God had answered him in the day of his distress. They gave Jacob all the foreign gods they had, including the rings in their ears, and he buried them under the oak near Shechem. A terror from God fell upon the cities around them, and no one pursued Jacob's family as they journeyed to Bethel. There Jacob built an altar as he had been commanded. There God appeared to him again and blessed him, confirming the name Israel and repeating the promises of land and descendants. Jacob set up a pillar of stone to mark the place where God had spoken with him. They journeyed from Bethel toward Ephrath, and on the way, Rachel went into labor. The birth was hard, and as her life ebbed away, the midwife tried to comfort her. "Do not fear, for you have another son." With her dying breath, Rachel named him Benoni, son of my sorrow. But Jacob called him Benjamin, son of my right hand. Rachel died and was buried on the way to Ephrath, which is Bethlehem. Jacob set up a pillar over her tomb. Israel journeyed on and pitched his tent beyond the tower of Eder while he dwelt there. Cage. Reuben went and lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine, and Israel heard of it. The firstborn had committed an offense that would cost him his birthright, though judgment would wait until Jacob's final blessing. Jacob came at last to his father Isaac at Mamre, at Hebron, where Abraham and Isaac had sojourned. Isaac was 180 years old when he breathed his last. He died old and full of days, and Esau and Jacob, his sons, buried him together. The brothers, who had been divided over a blessing, reunited once more over a grave, laying their father to rest beside Abraham and Sarah in the cave of Machpelah. The second generation of promise had ended, passed. The third was just beginning. Jacob settled in the land where his father had sojourned, in the land of Canaan, and the story of his family continued through his sons. Joseph, the firstborn of Rachel, the beloved wife, held a special place in his father's heart. Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons because he was the child of his old age. He made for him a robe of many colors, a garment that set him apart, that announced his favorite status to anyone who saw him wearing it. His brothers saw that their father loved Joseph more than all of them, and they hated him. They could not speak peacefully to him. Every conversation carried the weight of resentment. Every glance held bitterness. And then Joseph began to dream. He dreamed that they were binding sheaves in the field when his sheaf rose and stood upright while their sheaves gathered around and bowed down to his. He told his brothers this dream, and their hatred deepened. "Do you intend to reign over us? Do you actually think you will rule over us?" They hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. He dreamed again. The sun and moon and 11 stars were bowing down to him. He told this dream to his father as well as his brothers. Even Jacob rebuked him. "What is this dream? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come and bow to the ground before you?" His brothers were jealous, but his father kept the matter in mind, wondering what these visions might mean. The brothers went to pasture their father's flock near Shechem, and Jacob sent Joseph to check on them. He wandered in the fields until a man found him and directed him to Dothan, where his brothers had gone. They saw him coming from a distance, this dreamer in his colorful robe, and before he reached them, they conspired to kill him. "Here comes this dreamer," they said to one another. "Let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. We will say a fierce animal devoured him. Then we will see what becomes of his dreams." Reuben, the firstborn, intervened. He suggested they throw Joseph into a pit without shedding blood, intending secretly to rescue him later and return him to their father. When Joseph arrived, they stripped him of his robe and threw him into an empty cistern, a dry pit with no water. They sat down to eat, their brothers' cries echoing from the hole in the ground. When they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites approaching from Gilead, their camels carried spices and balm and myrrh, goods bound for Egypt. Judah proposed an alternative to murder. "What profit is there in killing our brother and concealing his blood? Let us sell him to the Ishmaelites." They pulled Joseph from the pit and sold him for 20 pieces of silver. The merchants continued toward Egypt with their new acquisition, and the brothers turned to the problem of explaining Joseph's disappearance. They slaughtered a goat and dipped a beautiful robe in its blood. They brought it to their father and let him draw his own conclusions. Jacob recognized it immediately. "It is my son's robe. A fierce animal has devoured him." Joseph is without doubt torn to pieces. He tore his garments, put sackcloth on his loins, and mourned for his son many days. All his children tried to comfort him, but he refused to comfort. "I shall go down to Sheol to my son, mourning," he said. And he wept for the boy he believed was dead. In Egypt, Joseph was sold to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man in the house of his Egyptian master. Potiphar saw that everything Joseph touched prospered and made him overseer of his entire household. The blessing that rested on Joseph extended to everything Potiphar owned. Joseph was handsome in form and appearance, and Potiphar's wife noticed. Day after day, she tried to seduce him. "Lie with me," she demanded. Joseph refused. His master had entrusted everything to him, had withheld nothing except his own wife. Could he do this great wickedness and sin against God? One day, when no one else was in the house, she caught him by his garment. "Lie with me," she insisted. He fled, leaving his garment in her hand, and ran outside. She used the abandoned clothing as evidence, calling the servants and then her husband, claiming Joseph had tried to assault her. When Potiphar heard his wife's accusation, his anger burned. He took Joseph and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. Even in prison, the Lord was with Joseph. The keeper of the prison put him in charge of all the other prisoners, trusting everything to his care. Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker offended their lord and were thrown into the same prison. Joseph was assigned to attend them. Both men dreamed on the same night, and both were troubled. Joseph noticed their distress and asked what was wrong. They had dreamed, they explained, and there was no one to interpret. Joseph answered that interpretations belonged to God. "Tell me your dreams." Cupbearer had seen a vine with 3 branches that budded and blossomed and produced ripe grapes. He had pressed them into Pharaoh's cup and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. Seth interpreted. "The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will restore you to your position. Only remember me when it goes well with you, and please mention me to Pharaoh to get me out of this prison." The baker, encouraged by the favorable interpretation, shared his own dream. 3 cake baskets were on his head, and birds were eating from the top basket. Joseph's interpretation was not favorable. "The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head from you and hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat your flesh." On the 3rd day, Pharaoh's birthday, everything happened as Joseph had said. The cupbearer was restored to his position, and the baker was hanged. But the cupbearer forgot about Joseph. 2 full years passed with Joseph languishing in prison. His request for help lost in the cupbearer's comfortable return to palace life. Then Pharaoh dreamed. He stood by the Nile, and 7 cows came up, attractive and plump, and they grazed among the reeds. 7 other cows came up after them, ugly and thin, and they stood beside the fat cows on the bank. The ugly, thin cows ate the attractive, plump cows, and Pharaoh awoke. He fell asleep and dreamed again. 7 ears of grain, plump and good, were growing on one stalk. 7 ears, thin and blighted, sprouted after them and swallowed up the good ears. Pharaoh awoke troubled. He summoned all the magicians and wise men of Egypt, but none could interpret his dreams. Then the cupbearer remembered. He told Pharaoh about the young Hebrew in prison who had interpreted dreams for him and the baker, and how everything had come true exactly as predicted. Joseph was brought hastily from the dungeon, shaved and changed, and brought before Pharaoh. "I have heard you can interpret dreams," Pharaoh said. Joseph answered carefully, "It is not in me." God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. Pharaoh recounted his dreams. Joseph explained that both dreams carried the same message. 7 years of great plenty were coming to Egypt, followed by 7 years of severe famine. The famine would be so harsh that the years of abundance would be forgotten. The dream was doubled because the matter was fixed by God and would happen soon. Joseph advised Pharaoh to appoint a wise man to oversee the land, to collect 1/5 of the produce during the good years and store it for the famine to come. The advice pleased Pharaoh. "Since God has shown you all this," he declared, "there is none so discerning and wise as you. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall order themselves according to your command. Only in regard to the throne will I be greater than you." Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, 13 years after his brothers had sold him into slavery. Pharaoh gave him Asenath, daughter of a priest, as his wife. She bore him 2 sons. His firstborn he named Manasseh, "For God has made me forget all my hardship." The second he named Ephraim, "For God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction." The 7 years of plenty came, and Joseph gathered grain in enormous quantities, like the sand of the sea, until he stopped measuring because it was beyond measure. Then the 7 years of famine began, just as Joseph had predicted. The famine spread to all lands, but in Egypt there was bread. People came from everywhere to buy grain, and Joseph opened the storehouses and sold to whoever came. Jacob learned that there was grain in Egypt. He sent 10 of his sons to buy food, but Benjamin, Joseph's only full brother, he kept at home, fearing that harm might befall him. The brothers came and bowed before Joseph with their faces to the ground, fulfilling the dream of sheaves from so many years before. Joseph recognized them, but they did not recognize him. He spoke harshly, accusing them of being spies. They protested their innocence, explaining they were 12 brothers, sons of one man in Canaan. The youngest was with their father, and one was no more. Joseph imprisoned them for 3 days, then released all but Simeon, whom he kept as a hostage. They must return with their youngest brother to prove they were telling the truth. He filled their bags with grain and secretly returned their money in the top of each sack. On the journey home, one brother discovered the silver, and their hearts sank. "What is this that God has done to us?" They told Jacob everything, and he refused to let Benjamin go. "Joseph is no more, Simeon is no more, and now you would take Benjamin. All this has come against me." But the famine continued, and the grain ran out. Jacob finally relented, sending Benjamin along with double the money and gifts of balm and honey, gum and myrrh, pistachio nuts and almonds. When Joseph saw Benjamin, he ordered a feast prepared. The brothers were terrified, thinking they would be enslaved over the money found in their sacks. But the steward reassured them. "Your God must have put treasure in your sacks." Joseph asked about their father. "Is he still alive?" They bowed their heads in reverence. Joseph looked at Benjamin and was overcome with emotion. He hurried to a private room and wept. He washed his face and returned to serve them a feast, giving Benjamin portions 5 times as large as anyone else. When they departed, Joseph had his silver cup hidden in Benjamin's sack. After they left the city, his steward overtook them and accused them of theft. They protested their innocence, declaring that whoever had the cup should die. The search began with the oldest and ended with the youngest, and the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. They tore their clothes and returned to face Joseph. Judah pleaded passionately, their father would die if Benjamin did not return. He offered himself as a slave in Benjamin's place. Joseph could contain himself no longer. He sent everyone else away and wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard it in the next room. "I am Joseph," he declared. "Is my father still alive?" His brothers could not answer, terrified at his presence. He called them closer. "I am your brother, Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. Can't be distressed or angry with yourselves. God sent me before you to preserve life. Hurry to my father and tell him to come down to me." He fell upon Benjamin's neck and wept, kissed all his brothers and wept upon them. Then they talked. News reached Pharaoh's house, and Pharaoh was pleased. He commanded Joseph to bring his entire family to Egypt, promising them the best of the land. Jacob heard that Joseph was alive and was stunned. His heart became numb because he did not believe them. But when he saw the wagons Joseph had sent, his spirit revived. "It is enough," he said. "Joseph, my son, is still alive. I will go and see him before I die." Israel set out with all he had. At Beersheba, he offered sacrifices and God spoke to him in a vision. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt. I will make you a great nation there. Okay? I will go down with you, and I will surely bring you up again. Joseph will close your eyes. Jacob came to Egypt with 70 souls, his sons and grandsons, his daughters and granddaughters. Joseph met his father in Goshen and fell on his neck and wept a long time. Israel said to Joseph, "Now let me die, since I have seen your face and know that you are still alive." They settled in Goshen, the best of the land, and Jacob lived in Egypt 17 years. When the time of his death drew near, Jacob blessed Joseph's sons, crossing his hands to give the greater blessing to the younger, Ephraim, over the firstborn, Manasseh. He gathered all his sons and blessed them, each with a blessing suited to his character and destiny. Judah received the promise of kingship. The scepter would not depart from Judah until tribute came to him. Jacob charged his sons to bury him with his fathers in the cave of Machpelah, where Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah and Leah were buried. He drew his feet into the bed and breathed his last, gathered to his people. Joseph fell on his father's face, weeping and kissing him. They embalmed Jacob and mourned him 70 days. Then a great company went up to Canaan and buried him in the cave as he had commanded. The brothers feared that with their father dead, Joseph would take revenge. They sent a message claiming Jacob had asked Joseph to forgive them. Joseph wept when he received their words. He reassured them, "Do not fear. Am I in the place of God? You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring about that many people should be kept alive. I will provide for you and your little ones." Joseph lived 110 years, saw Ephraim's children to the 3rd generation. When his end approached, he spoke to his brothers, "I am about to die, but God will visit you and bring you up out of this land to the land he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob." He made them swear to carry his bones when that day came. Joseph died and was embalmed and placed in a coffin in Egypt, but his bones would not remain there forever. One day, centuries later, when God visited the children of Israel and led them out of bondage, they would carry Joseph's remains with them to the promised land. The story of beginnings had ended, but the greater story was only pausing, waiting for the next chapter to unfold in the fullness of time.